Welcome everyone to the eMedica F2 SJT Essentials webinar for FY2 Standalone 2024. For those that haven't met me before, my name is Muhib Rahman. I'm a portfolio GP, which means I'm a GP with multiple roles, some clinical, some non-clinical, and a consultant in medical education. I used to be an examiner for the GMC and an invigilator for their PLAB Part 2, the OSCE examination, and I'm a current OSCE examiner for Liverpool Medical School for finals. I'm one of the authors, have written questions for the prescribing safety assessment, and our team have got a lot of expertise in situation judgment testing. We've been teaching about SJTs for GP training, which was the first specialty to use it for medical recruitment back in 2007, and been teaching for the Foundation SJT since 2012, and actually wrote both the first article on the use of SJTs in medical recruitment in BMJ Careers back in 2007, and also the first article for the use of SJT for Foundation program when it first came into being. And our team have trained now over 76,000 delegates in the last 18 years of running courses. So some of my roles, I partner in my own practice. I'm one of the GPs at a secure unit for women with significant mental health illness. And then in my teaching roles, as well as teaching for eMedica, we've run joint courses with the Royal College of General Practice, Beds and Hearts faculty for Health Education England for various deaneries. So some key dates, hopefully you're already familiar with these, but by the 31st of January, you'll get your long listing outcome. So you know if your application has been accepted, if you've met the eligibility criteria. You'll be able to actually book an SJT slot between the 8th and 14th of February, and the actual exam is 6th to the 12th of March. So you've still got a good amount of time to prepare. The results in terms of your SJT scores will come out on the 10th of April. And you'll know if you've been shortlisted or not, or if you're on the reserve list for interview. You'll be able to actually book an interview slot if you're shortlisted between the 10th and 15th of April. And then those interviews are 22nd to the 25th of April. And those that have got to interview stage, you'll find out if you got a job offer or not, i.e. the interview results, they'll start coming out on the 30th of April. Okay. Now today, we're just going to focus on the SJT. Okay, how your scores are used. We're not going to focus on interview preparation. There isn't time for that in the 45 minutes that we've got today. So in terms of the FY2 Standalone SJT, the first thing you need to know is the format. So the actual exam lasts just 45 minutes. There will be some time for familiarization beforehand, and there'll be a survey afterwards, which is optional. The actual exam is 45 minutes. And in that time, you're going to be given 20 different SJT scenarios. Now, each scenario will be split into a number of stems, minimum 3, maximum of 8 stems per scenario. Every single question in the FY2 SJT will follow the Ratings SJT format. There are no ranking SJTs, there are no pick 3 from 8 SJTs, like there used to be in the old Foundation Year 1 SJT, and like there are in the MSRA SJT that someone will do later on when you're applying for specialty training. So there are only ratings type SJTs in the F2 SJT. However, this year, there are 2 new subtypes. So although there's only ratings SJTs, there's 3 different types of ratings SJTs in the exam this year. So the first is the one that's always been in the FY2 SJT, which is rating actions and rating them from 5 possible ratings. The 2 new types are evolving dilemmas, where they might give you a scenario, get you to rate some actions, but then they might add some additional information to that scenario to evolve the scenario and give you, if you like, more detailed information, then ask you to rate some more items. Then they might evolve it further. So you could evolve up to 3 times. And then speech dilemmas. Historically, you're always asked to rate between different actions, different things to do. But you may get some where it will be specific things to say, and it'll be about the communication, the specific language being used, and which one you think is, extremely desirable to extremely undesirable. So whether you're rating an action, whether it's an evolving dilemma, which might involve actions or speech, or whether it's a speech dilemma, in each of these, you'll be asked to rate each of the items from 5 possible ratings. So from extremely desirable to extremely undesirable. So what do those things mean? Well, extremely desirable means that this is something that's very appropriate thing to do for an F2. All of these are set at the level of a Foundation Year 2 doctor, because that's the job you're applying for. So extremely desirable, essentially, it'll either be entirely positive or almost entirely positive, okay, and very appropriate to deal with that situation. 2 is slightly desirable. This is something that's appropriate, but not ideal. There may be some positives and negatives. There's going to be a lot more positive, maybe with some slight negatives, but overall, it's more positive than negative. Number 3 is neutral, neither desirable nor undesirable. This is something that's not appropriate or inappropriate. It's either neutral, it won't positively or negatively impact the scenario, or it's just not relevant to the scenario in any way. 4 is slightly undesirable. This is something that would be inappropriate for an F2 to do, but not absolutely terrible. It's more negative than positive, but maybe there are some positives to it. And then 5 is extremely undesirable. This is either very inappropriate, or it might be harmful, or it goes clearly against GMC guidance. This is not appropriate at all for an F2 to do. Okay, almost entirely negative, or goes clearly against GMC guidance. Okay, so that's the 5 options you're going to have for every question. And the way that it's marked is using a near-miss marking system. So we'll go through this when we do a sample question. So basically, for each STEM, there's a maximum of 4 marks. So if you get the answer perfectly correct, you get 4 marks for that STEM. If you're 1 position away, you get 3 marks. If you're 2 positions away, you get 2 marks. If you're 3 positions away, you get 1 mark. If you're 4 positions away, you get no marks for that STEM. That's only possible if something is supposed to be extremely desirable and you rank it as extremely undesirable, or vice versa. That's the only way you can be 4 positions away and get 0 marks for a STEM. Okay. Now, remember that the SJT is not testing clinical knowledge. What it's testing is your judgment and decision making, but some questions will test knowledge of key guidance, primarily from GMC, ethical guidance, or good medical practice. Ultimately, what it's trying to assess is your suitability to work as an F2 doctor in the UK, and so it tests against professional attributes that have been deemed important for an F2 doctor. So every single question will map back to, in terms of if something extremely desirable, extremely undesirable, we talked about appropriate for an F2, what you want to think about is in relation to these 5 core competencies: commitment to professionalism, coping with pressure, effective communication, patient focus, and working effectively as part of a team. And some questions, having a good knowledge of GMC guidance will make it easier for you to get the right answer. Okay, so I'm going to go straight into it, because I think sometimes if I just talk about some of these attributes, or if I talk about how it's marked and you've not actually done one of these, it might not be clear. It might be much clearer after we've done one. So I'm going to show you a question. I'll give you about 50 seconds to look at this first part, which contains the actual scenario and the first STEM. Okay, and we'll spend a lot of time going through this particular bit in detail so you understand the scenario. And then when we do the subsequent STEMs that make up this particular scenario, it'll be a lot quicker. Okay, so what you're going to do is when I put the question up, you won't see or hear me, you will just see the scenario. I mean, take some time to think about it, read it carefully, and then wait till I launch the poll, and then you select your rating. Okay, so here we go. Okay, I've launched the poll. Please select your answer from the poll. About half of you selected 1, extremely desirable, and then a fifth, slightly desirable, a fifth, neither desirable nor undesirable, and then very few people picked 4, nobody picked 5. Okay, so before we look at what is the preferred response, let's go through, and as you're reading, what I want you to do when you're in the exam, as you're reading the scenario, try to picture being there, try to picture the scene, okay? So you'll notice here, this isn't about you, this is about Yvonne. And this is the way that F2 SJTs, most of them are framed in this way, in the third person. Whereas the F1 SJT and the MSRA SJT, in most of them, it will say you are an F2 doctor, you are doing something rather than another doctor. This is about this doctor, Yvonne. So Yvonne is called to see Mrs. Evans, who's become unresponsive following a massive postpartum hemorrhage. So can you see? This patient has just given birth and now she's having a big bleed. Okay, postpartum means after giving birth, right? And Mrs. Evans still has a pulse and is breathing on her own. So while she's losing a lot of blood and she's become unconscious, she's not in arrest at the moment. And her notes show a signed, valid advance directive declining blood products even under threat to life. And this was confirmed as valid on admission, i.e., when she was admitted, because she might have signed this advance directive saying, look, I don't want blood products, even if that means I would risk my life. I don't want to be given blood. That's called an advance directive, when you refuse something in advance. Okay. And this was confirmed as being valid when she was admitted, because she might have signed that a couple of years ago. Sometimes people can change their mind. But when she was admitted and she's still competent, i.e., before she became unconscious, before she went into labor, she knows she's about to go into labor to deliver a baby. She confirmed, look, if I bleed out, I don't want you to give me blood, even if that means I might die. Everyone see that? You can see that from the scenario. Okay, but look, Mr. Evans is very distressed and wants the doctor, Yvonne, to administer a blood transfusion. You can imagine his wife's just given birth to a baby. Now he sees his wife's unconscious and she's bleeding out. Because that's the scenario. I really want you to picture that. And then this is how it will be framed. How desirable are each of the following responses for Yvonne in this situation? And it will put here 1 extremely desirable to 5 extremely undesirable. And then, we've got the options here to actually select from. So the correct answer here is 1, extremely desirable. Okay. So if you picked extremely desirable, which half of you did, write down 4 marks, because I want you to track how much you score today. Okay. Now, you can see, if you picked slightly desirable, you're 1 away from the best response. So you get 3 marks. This is called near miss marking. If you get it wrong, you don't get 0 automatically. You could still get partial marks depending how close your answer is to the best response. If you put neither desirable nor undesirable, you can see you're 1, 2 away from the best response, so you get 2 marks for that. If you put slightly undesirable, you're 3 away. Look, 1, 2, 3 away, you get a mark for that. The only way you'd get 0 marks is if you picked extremely undesirable for this option, which is extremely desirable, because that suggests that your judgment is very far from the best response. So you get no marks for that. Okay. Nobody selected that. So why is this extremely desirable? Type into the chat why this is extremely desirable and try to map back to some of those core competencies that we talked about. I think which ones are being assessed here and which ones would this show positives for, in terms of, show that these are appropriate things to do in terms of those competencies. So someone said that patient is being put first, i.e., can you all recognize that this is something potentially life-threatening? So you've got a patient who's very unwell. They're having a big bleed. And while they are still breathing and they've still got a pulse, they're unresponsive. They've lost that much blood that they've become unconscious. A patient like this could deteriorate further, couldn't they? So recognizing that there's an urgency to this, to get someone senior there, is thinking about the patient's best interest. It also, someone's mentioned escalation. It also recognizes your limits. Coping with pressure, part of that is recognizing your limits. It's recognizing this is way too complex and way too sort of critical for an FY2 doctor to try to deal with on their own. To be honest, any doctor to deal with on your own. You need help here. You recognize that, don't you? Okay. And then it also, remember that one of the domains was about working as part of a team. What's one of your roles as a junior doctor at FY2 level? To keep senior members of the team up to date about things that are important for patients that they're being looked after. Ultimately, who's responsible for this patient? The consultant. They're responsible for every patient admitted under their care. Now, they don't need to know about every small change in every patient, but this is clearly something critical. Your consultant would definitely want to know about this. That's part of your role, is contacting them recognizing that the most senior person is most likely to be able to help with this, and recognizing there's an urgency to it. You see, so there's lots of positives here in terms of mapping back to those domains. That's why this is extremely desirable. This is a very appropriate thing. If I go back to what the ratings mean, okay, look, this is a very appropriate thing to do as an FY2, and look how it shows positives for coping with pressure, for patient focus, and for working effectively as part of a team. So you've shown positives for lots of the key things that are being assessed here. That's why it's extremely desirable. Okay, right, let's move on to the next one. I'll give you far less time for this one before I launch the poll, because the scenario will stay the same. It's just this bit that changes. The options are also the same. Okay, so I'll launch the poll shortly. Okay, 2 more seconds, so please select an option. If you're not quick in the real exam, you're going to run out of time, because if there's 20 scenarios and each one's got between 3 and 8 stems, there's going to be 100 plus actual items like this. Like this is only the second item, okay? Okay, so I'll stop this there. Most people selected 5, a few people selected 4, okay? So here, tell Mr. Evans that there's nothing else that can be done for his wife. So this is extremely undesirable. Now you can imagine he's already very distressed. How do you think he's going to feel if you, the word tell here is really important. Rather than explain what's happening and that you're going to get help, tell him, look, there's nothing else that can be done. What else is wrong with this, saying that there's nothing else that can be done? What's another negative about this? Has the patient refused all care in her advance directive? No, she's just refused blood products. So, for example, let's say now she's still got a pulse and she's still breathing. Let's say that she stops breathing and she loses her pulse as she's gone into arrest. Could we resuscitate her? Has she said that she doesn't want to be resuscitated? No, she hasn't. You see, equally, could getting someone more senior and more experienced be helpful? Yes. So if you say nothing else can be done, it suggests that no one else can help either. There might not be that much more that you can do, although there are some things you could do. And so this is also a negative in that if you think about professionalism, this is not true that nothing else can be done. You just can't do this. She's declined blood products. She hasn't declined all care. So this is why this is extremely undesirable. Okay, that it's likely to upset Mr. Evans. The usage of the word tell rather than discuss or explain is important here. But also, it's just not correct. There are some things that can be done. Okay, let's move on to the next step. Here we go. Okay, that's time. Please select an answer. By the way, nobody can see who has picked which answer. I just get the percentage of each option. I don't know who picked which option. So, it's anonymous. Make sure you select something, get involved. All right. Okay, so that's really interesting. About half of you picked extremely undesirable. About a third of you picked slightly undesirable. And then the rest either picked 2 or 3. Nobody picked extremely desirable. Okay. So let's look at the actual option. Hand Mr. Evans the medical notes and tell him, look at the advance directive. Okay. So now this is extremely undesirable. First of all, type into the chat, what's critically wrong and goes clearly against GMC guidance that makes this extremely undesirable? Yeah, absolutely. Well done. It's a complete breach in confidentiality. Okay. handing him the medical notes, the patient hasn't given permission. Not only could he see the advanced directive, but giving him the whole notes, he could look at something else. What if there was something else in those notes that she hadn't shared with her husband and didn't want her husband to know? It's an absolute breach in confidentiality. So it goes clearly against GMC guidance, okay? But also, again, the use of the word tell. How do you think the patient might respond to that? It might seem a bit rude, right? Here, look at this. Okay. And this links to the GMC guidance on confidentiality, that in terms of disclosing patients' personal information, that here you haven't got the patient's permission. If you're going to do that, you must be satisfied that there's a legal basis for breaching confidentiality. And there are certain reasons, like when it's required by law, where it's overall in the patient's best interest, where, it's something like a notifiable disease, for example, or, there's a list of things which, when you review the GMC guidance of confidentiality, you become familiar with. We'll cover that at the full day course, okay? But this doesn't meet any of those. And so you don't have a legal basis to breach patients' confidentiality in this scenario, okay? And that's why it's extremely undesirable. However, let me know in the chat, how many of you thought that this is clearly a breach of confidentiality and that telling him, look at this sounds rude, and thought it was awful and extremely undesirable, but didn't want to pick this because you felt, I've used that option up in the previous one, and you thought that you had to pick a different one, and that's why you picked, for example, slightly undesirable. By the way, if you pick slightly undesirable, you'd still get 3 marks because you're only 1 away. But I don't want you to get 3 marks. I want you to get 4 for every one, because even 1 mark can make a difference. This is not a pass-fail exam. It's competitively ranked. 1 mark could be the difference between you getting an interview and not getting an interview. So you should chase every single mark. Okay? So how many of you actually thought it was extremely undesirable, objectively looking at it, but felt, I can't use this because I've just used it in the last one, and so felt I have to pick a different one? You thought you have to use all of these in different options, that's how it's marked, or that's how it's, a few people have said that. That's not how it is at all. Each of these ratings is a separate bit. You can use the same option once, more than once, or not at all. So you might find that in some scenarios, none of them are extremely desirable. In some scenarios, none of them might be neither desirable nor undesirable. Some of them, none of them might be extremely undesirable. Okay, you pick what matches. Okay, you're not going to use some options in some questions. Some questions you might find that they're all extremely desirable. All right, you pick what matches. It's not like I've used that up. That's not how it works. This is what I call the ratings trap, where people confuse this with ranking SJT questions, where you're ranking, one has to be the best, then the next best. You have to use all the options. These are not ranking SJTs. These are ratings SJTs. Okay. Good. So let's move on to the next one. D. Here we go. Okay, poll is launched. Please select your answer. Okay, so that's really interesting. Less than half of you picked extremely desirable. About 30% slightly desirable. About a fifth neither desirable nor undesirable, and the rest picked slightly undesirable. Nobody picked extremely undesirable. Okay, so continue to monitor Mrs. Evans' vital signs, i.e. pulse, blood pressure, breathing. This is extremely desirable. Why? Well, look, she's unresponsive at the moment, unconscious, but she still has a pulse and is breathing, but she's still bleeding out. What could happen to a patient like this? Yeah, absolutely. There's a risk of deterioration. Well done. This patient could go into arrest, right? And if you continue to monitor, i.e. every so often you're checking on these things, you could pick that up as soon as it happens, and there's more chance that you could resuscitate them. Alongside CPR, someone might not want blood, but you might still be able to give them fluids, for example. That in some cases can be helpful. Okay, and so this is extremely desirable. Now, again, one of the things that sometimes people think, they think, oh, but this isn't solving the whole problem. And this is another really important thing in ratings SJTs, that each bit, you're just looking at is this something that is appropriate or inappropriate? Okay. It doesn't have to resolve the whole situation on its own, because you could do this and you could contact your consultant and ask for help, and they can both be extremely desirable. You don't have to solve the whole scenario in any one single stem, but you're just looking at this bit on its own. Is it a good or bad thing to do? Is it an appropriate or inappropriate thing to do? That's really, really important. Okay. This doesn't mean that you can't also discuss with the husband and explain what you are and aren't going to do, and explain, oh, I'm going to get the consultant to come. You could do that as well. This doesn't stop you doing something else. You're just looking at this bit. Is it positive or negative? It's not that this is your whole answer. Again, that's how it is in ranking SJTs, but there are no ranking SJTs in the F2 SJT. These are ratings. That's another really important principle that a lot of people misunderstand that leads to losing marks. Okay, right, let's move to the next one. E. Okay, so administer a blood transfusion in Mrs. Evans' best interest. Okay, so most of you, more than 90%, have put this as extremely undesirable. We've got some people that have thought it's slightly desirable. Okay, so this is extremely undesirable. All right, so well done. Most of you got this right. Those that picked slightly desirable, you'd get 1 mark because that's 1, 2, 3 away from the best response. Why is this extremely undesirable? Because it goes directly against the patient's autonomy. Well done. So autonomy is one of the biomedical ethical principles, right? Autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. So the principle of autonomy is that a patient has the right to make an unwise choice, okay? And you have to respect their choice, even if you don't agree with it. Look, she had a signed valid advance directive declining blood products, even if that threatened her life. And this was confirmed as valid on admission. This is still her wish when she came in. And so this would be going directly against. Now, not only would this be unprofessional and go against GMC guidance, look at the GMC guidance on patients who refuse treatment, that you must respect a competent patient's decision to refuse an investigation or treatment, even if you think their decision is wrong or irrational. When they came in, they weren't unconscious at that point. They were competent and they confirmed, this is still my wish. Now they're unconscious. They can't tell you what they want, but you know what they wanted before this situation. So you have to respect that. And in fact, there's a specific bit about this scenario that, for example, many patients who follow the faith of Jehovah's Witnesses might have a strong objection to the use of blood and blood products and may refuse them even if they may die as a result. Okay? This is specifically mentioned in the GMC guidance. But there's something beyond that. That is, not only would this be considered unprofessional, but a valid advance directive is actually binding in law in the UK. This would actually be illegal. It would be considered an assault on this patient. So not only could you get into significant trouble that you've gone against a patient's wishes and being unprofessional, but you could actually be prosecuted for this. Okay, this could lead to you being struck off, directly sort of disregarding a patient's valid advance directive and giving them something they said clearly that they don't want. You see here, knowing that makes this question much easier to understand, okay, or answer. So this is extremely undesirable. Okay, last one. Okay, now this one, there's a huge spread in terms of what people have picked. So first of all, every single option has been picked. Okay, just less than half. The most popular one is number 2, slightly desirable, 40 something percent. Then a quarter of you, slightly undesirable. Then split between extremely desirable and neutral. And then a few people have picked extremely undesirable. So this is the first one where every single option has been picked by people. So a couple of things that are important here. The word tell Mr. Evans, he should, this is another important word, he should contact the chaplaincy service for support. Okay. So this is slightly desirable. So if you picked slightly desirable, you'd get 4 marks. And you see here, if you picked extremely desirable or neither desirable nor undesirable, both of these options will give you 3 marks, because you can see they're both one away. This is one away going up. This is one away going down. There is no option here that would get you 0 marks, because even this, which is the worst option, is 1, 2, 3 away, which you get 1 mark for. There are no options that are 4 away, because the correct answer is slightly desirable. You see, there can't be anything that's 4 away, which is how you get 0. Okay, so why do you think this is slightly desirable? Remember, what did we say slightly desirable? It's somewhat appropriate. It's, got some positives and negatives, more positive than negative, but it has got some negatives. So what are the positives first, and what are the negatives? So in terms of positives, he's very distressed. And so actually, he may well benefit from additional support. And this may or may not be the reason that the patient declined blood products, may be to do with their religion. It may not be. Either way, a chaplaincy service can offer support in both situations. In a lot of hospitals, there will be, I've worked in hospitals or been to hospitals where, on staff, they will have a Christian chaplain, they will have a Muslim chaplain, but they'll also have someone there that can offer support to people who don't follow a specific religion or who are atheist, or they can have contacts if someone follows a specific religion and would like advice from someone, from their church or their faith, that they can put them in touch. And so, there's likely to be a lot of benefit that can come from it. So what are the negatives then? Why isn't this extremely desirable? A lot of good could come from this. They could benefit from support because they're distressed and because of, possibly the nature of the issue. But it's telling them that they should. That comes across as quite doctor-centered, as if they don't really have much choice. You should do this. Consider the difference between if it said, explain to Mr. Evans that he may find it helpful to contact the chaplaincy service, or that if you would like support, you can give him the contact details. You see, that would make it extremely desirable, because then there'd be nothing negative about it. Whereas here, this could come across as quite doctor-centered. It's as if he's got no choice. Okay? And that's why but overall, this is likely to be beneficial. That's why it's slightly desirable. It's more positive than negative. Okay, add up your score from the 6 bits that we did, and you get a total out of 24 maximum, because there were 6 stems. Okay, and what I'll do is I'll launch a different poll. I'll launch a slightly different poll, and you can select options of A, B, C, D, E to just show your score. Again, this is anonymous. No one can see which person is clicking what, but it just might give you an idea. So A would be if you got every single one perfectly correct, you would have 24, because you got 4 for each bit. Okay. And then we've got bands, 21 to 23, 18 to 20, 15 to 17, 14 or less. Okay. I'll give you a second. As I said, it's anonymous, but it's useful to see. Because remember, this is not a pass-fail exam. It's competitively ranked. It's how you do compared to others that will determine if you get an interview slot or not. Okay, great. So a few of you have got every single one perfectly correct. So well done. Okay. Then more than a quarter of you are somewhere here. That means most of them you got perfectly correct, and a few of them you might have been like 1 away. Most of you, more than half of you, are here. Okay. Nobody got either of these options. You'd have to get most of them significantly away from the best response to get these scores down here. Okay. So in terms of the core knowledge that would help in some of the SJT questions. These are some of the things. So the biomedical ethical principles, confidentiality, knowing when you can and can't breach confidentiality. What are the situations where you're legally allowed to breach confidentiality? Capacity, including understanding Gillick competence and the Fraser guidelines and the difference between them. Consent, including things like the Montgomery case, the Bolam case, the latest updates to the GMC Good Medical Practice on consent in 2024. GMC duties of a doctor and key ethical guidance on things like child protection, end-of-life care, personal beliefs and medical practice. We saw an example of that here. Raising concerns, prescribing, maintaining boundaries, social media. There's been specific update to that in 2024, and financial issues, so things like gifts, when we can and can't accept them and so on. Because the SJT asks what a good doctor should do in these scenarios. Not what you would do, but what a good doctor should do. And so some questions will test knowledge of key guidance. So revising that can be helpful, okay? So any questions, please ask them in the Q&A, not in the chat, but I'm going to come back to questions at the end. I just want to give you a chance to ask them now, but I want to talk about how to prepare. So the first thing is, the most important thing is every single question will map back to those 5 domains, okay? And each of those has subdomains, which we'll go through in detail at the full day course, and understanding them. And when you're reading a question, seeing, I can see that this is primarily testing this part of working as part of team, or this part of coping with pressure, or this part of communication, or this part of, that makes it much easier to get the best option. Reading and understanding the new version of Good Medical Practice 2024. Why is that important? Because the new version of Good Medical Practice 2024 has some key updates. It becomes into effect on the 30th of January. And your exam is in March, and therefore this guidance will apply for your exam. The old guidance, it will be outdated from then, okay? So, from tomorrow, basically, this is the new standard that all doctors working and registered with the GMC will be held to, will be the 2024 guidance. Reading core parts of GMC ethical guidance and practicing specifically FY2 ratings questions, because they're different to ranking questions and selecting 3 from 8 questions. The mindset is different. So useful resources. The UKFPO has published a selection. They've got 18 official practice FY2 questions with answers and explanations. I'd recommend you definitely go through all of those. They're on the UKFPO website. There are still available the old FY1 foundation papers. They're still available online. Within them, there were ratings questions which are slightly different. They asked you to rate. There were only 4 options, 4 ratings rather than 5, and they were from very appropriate to inappropriate rather than desirable, and there were some differences. So you need to note that there's differences in the format, okay? Understanding those subdomains, which are outlined in the SJT monograph, being familiar with Good Medical Practice 2024, we already talked about. Good Medical Practice in Action has some interactive scenarios that allows you to put those into context, and then reading the core bits of GMC ethical guidance relevant for an F2, okay? Now, you can do a lot of this yourself, but if you want to make it efficient, then we do have a full day FY2 SJT course. So it's the 10th of February. It's a full day course, 9:30 a.m. till 6 p.m. It will be live and interactive via Zoom, like we've been doing today. We'll go through the key theory, all of the core ethical guidance, including the big changes in the 2024 Good Medical Practice. Exam technique, because Ratings SJT is primarily about technique rather than knowledge. Having knowledge of that core guidance can really help, and we'll cover that. But then being able to apply that, managing your time, understanding the differences, that's key. We only saw example of the most common type of Ratings SJT today, which is where you rate actions. But remember, there's new types for the exam this year: evolving dilemmas and speech dilemmas. At the course, we will see examples of all 3 types, okay? In the afternoon, you will do a full 20 scenario, i.e. with over 100 stems, teaching FY2 mock SJT, where we'll get you used to the optimum pacing, and then there'll be detailed explanations and answers. That will be the whole afternoon. After the course, you'll get access to a different full SJT mock in FY2 ratings format online to do in your own time with answers and explanations. And you'll be able to request access to the course recording for a month in case you want to go over it for revision. Every question at the course and in the mock that you'll be given after the course will be in the FY2 ratings format. So it won't be in the old format for F1. It won't be ranking 5. It won't be selecting 3 from 8. It's specifically been written for the FY2 SJT course. Okay, so there's details here. And if I show you, if you click this link, it will take you to this page on our website, FY2 Standalone SJT. Okay, so you can just book it there. We have an early bird discount. So anybody that books by the end of this month, you can save £55. So you'll pay £195 rather than the standard price, which is £250. Okay, you don't need any code for that. It will just change automatically on the 1st of February. Okay, so the early bird right up until midnight on the 31st of January will run. 1st of February, it will change to the standard price. Okay, so in terms of how your scores will be used, let me just cover that and then we'll take questions so I can then summarize. Now, your SJT score is going to be used to rank you. Okay, so last year, for example, initially they advertised 90 jobs. By the time they got to the final allocation, a few more people had dropped out and they actually had 100 and something jobs in the end. But what they will do is, last year, over 1,000 people applied for FY2 Standalone, okay, for those initially 90 jobs. They haven't released the numbers of people that have applied this year. They tend to do that much later. But let's say that there's a similar number. I suspect there'll be a lot more just because competition for all specialties and all training posts has been gone up significantly. IMT, for example, this year was nearly 40% up on previous years, okay? But let's say there's, I don't know, 1,200, 1,500 people apply. And let's say there's 100 jobs. If there's 100 jobs, they will only shortlist for interview the top 300 scores from the SJT. So most people that apply won't get an interview slot. Do you see? So if there's 100 jobs, they'll rank everyone by your SJT score. I.e., whoever's got the best score, they rank number 1. Whoever's got the second best score, they rank number 2, and so on. And the top, if there's 100 jobs, the top 300, however many jobs there are, 3 to 1, they will shortlist for interview. Everyone else, that's it. Your application ends for this round. Once you get shortlisted, though, in previous years, they used to use the SJT, like several years ago. The SJT was one part and the interview was one part of the overall rank. Last year and this year, they've confirmed that the SJT is just to decide who gets the interview. Once you get that interview, the score doesn't matter. What matters is how you score in the interview, which will decide your final ranking and whether you get a job or not. Because again, remember, just getting an interview doesn't mean you get a job. There's 300 people getting an interview, only 100 will get a job, the top 100 at interview. The other 200 won't get a job, will they? Okay. So look, this is not a pass-fail exam. It's competitively ranked. Every mark counts. Even one mark, even one question could be the difference between you getting that last interview slot and not getting it. Because only the top scorers are going to get an interview at a ratio of 3 to 1. So what you want to do is focus on getting the absolute best score possible, not scraping through with the minimum. You want to get the best score possible because competition is likely to be higher this year. And so even someone that, a score that might have got someone an interview last year might not be enough this year because more competitive. An exam technique can make a huge difference. So, focused preparation and practice can help to boost your scores. So if you found, we've had 40 minutes of teaching today. If you found that helpful, think what over 7 hours on the full day course will help you, and we'll be able to go through all 3 types. I'll leave you with this, and then I'll take questions from Abraham Lincoln. If you've got 6 hours to chop down a tree, you do well to spend 4 hours sharpening your axe. I.e., if you have the right tools at your disposal, if you really understand the exam, if you sharpen your axe, when you spend that 2 hours chopping, you'll be able to chop a lot more trees than someone that spends 6 hours chopping with a blunt axe, okay? Because they haven't got the right tools and the right understanding of how to approach things, okay? So for anyone that hasn't got questions, I hope you've got a much clearer idea about the format, about some of the things that might catch people out, like the rating strap, like thinking that you have to use all the different options and this one's used up. Hopefully you're clear about what are they actually testing, what is the format, how is it marked, what kinds of things might benefit you, okay? And some of you might, I might see you at the full day course on the 10th, okay? But whether you joined that or not, I hope you found it helpful and you can go away, and our team wish you absolutely all the best with getting a really good score, getting that interview, so ultimately you can get onto the program, okay?